Thank you everybody again for being here and welcome to April's Tenant Talk Live. Today's theme is leveraging citywide partnerships to advance tenant unionization. And for folks that might be new and to friends that are here again, my name is Sid Betancourt and I'm a project manager for inclusive community engagement at the Coalition, and I use she, they pronouns. And again, you're currently joining Tenant Talk Live. For folks who might be newer, this is where we can provide opportunities for you to connect with fellow tenants and residents across the country, share best practices, but also learn how to be more involved in influencing federal advocacy or housing policies in your communities. And today we're joined by two awesome guests, which I will introduce shortly. But before we do that, I'll do some NLIHC updates really quickly. So first, we'll just review our community agreements, which we came up with at the beginning of the year. And if you weren't part of constructing those, don't worry about it. You still have time to provide feedback throughout the year if you have any additions or tweaks to make. So these are agreements for 2025. A rule for myself or an agreement for myself is just to remind everybody that this call is being recorded to share with those online that might not be able to attend at the time. The first rule is our platinum rule, which is treating others the way they want to be treated. And the reason why it's worded that way is just to consider how others might be treated and how that might differ from how you want to be treated. And it kind of puts empathy at the forefront of that. And then number two is we show respect to others by being considerate of our interactions and accountable for our actions. Number three is we listen actively with an open mind and empathy. We listen with the intent to learn something of value from those who are sharing. We are as attentive to and present with each other as possible. And then the fourth one is we take up space. There's a typo there, which I'll fix in a little bit. But we take up space and remember to give space to others to ensure everyone feels empowered to contribute to this conversation. And this includes muting your microphone when others are speaking. And in the future, we've had people in the past read those out loud, but I want to make sure we're able to get through everything today. But if y'all have any thoughts, again, feel free to email me if you have any recommendations or suggestions that you want to make, or if you have any feedback at all. And then we always send out the materials for this call. So if you miss any links in the chat, if you want to see the recording, we'll be sending that out with our recap materials this Friday with the connection e-blast that comes out around 1 p.m. every email. So if you're not signed up for NLIHC emails, we'll make sure to drop that link in the chat for you. And for our last update, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Courtney Cooperman, who is our program manager for our Homes Our Votes campaign, to share more about a really new, exciting program that we just started up.
Thanks so much, Sid. Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Cooperman. I use she, her pronouns. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new ones as well. So as Sid mentioned, we are launching a brand new Tenant Leader Fellowship for Our Homes, Our Votes. Now, what is Our Homes, Our Votes? Our Homes, Our Votes is our nonpartisan initiative to increase voter turnout among renters with low incomes and to elevate housing as an election issue. So our goal is really to increase participation in the democratic process. And we know that many of you have been really involved in civic engagement and election work, and that tenant leaders are really the backbone of this. That tenant leaders are the ones who have the power to have conversations with their neighbors and participate in the political process. So we're really excited to have this opportunity. We'll have 20 tenant leaders in the cohort from all over the country. The cohort will meet virtually every other month. And there will be a component of like an independent project that our tenant leaders will work on throughout the duration of the fellowship. So if there's something like, you want to organize ride to the polls for an upcoming election, or do a voter registration drive, or write an article for a local paper about why voting matters. Those are just a few examples. Definitely doesn't need to be one of those individual things. And the fellowship will be paid. There is a stipend upon successful completion of the fellowship of $1,000. We know that your time is valuable, and it's very important to compensate you for doing this leadership work. So the application is live now. The deadline is April 18th at midnight. We have a PDF document that gets into some more details about the program, answers some FAQs, and then has all of the questions that are in the application. The application is a type form survey, so you can't view all the questions at once, but you can view them all on the PDF. So we'll share that in the chat. And then the link, so there's the, thank you. So Kenza just shared the link to the application itself on Typeform and the program description and application guide. So that's the gist of it. I definitely encourage you all to apply. I know some of you have applied already, and we're just really looking forward to launching this fellowship and elevating the leadership that many of you are bringing to your communities.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Courtney, for sharing. And it's a really exciting opportunity. And I hope some of you are able to apply for that program. And if you have any questions, Courtney, can they email you? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, great. We'll get started. So just some logistics. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But we just ask that you stay muted if you're not speaking. But if you're not able to catch it in time, someone on staff might be able to get to you before you do that. But I'm now going to introduce our lovely speakers that are joining us for today's call. So today we have Sarah White and we have Luke Melonakos-Harrison joining us from Connecticut. Sarah is a staff attorney with the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, where she focuses on a variety of housing issues, actually, but for foreclosure prevention, mortgage servicing, and fair lending. And she also works really closely with the Connecticut Tenants Union. And Luke is a tenant union leader based in New Haven, Connecticut, dedicated to ensuring stronger protections for tenants in his community. So thanks again, Sarah and Luke, for joining us. You can learn more about their organizations in the chat, which we will share shortly. But before we get started really fast, I want to make sure that I give you all a chance to connect again. So I will be putting you all in breakout rooms. We just ask that you introduce yourselves to each other. I know it's been a rough couple of months for everyone. I don't want to ignore that elephant in the room. But I do want to give you all the opportunity as we head into spring, or we are already in spring, to talk a little bit about maybe one thing that has brought you joy or hope. And hopefully that continues to inspire us as we move into this hard work together. So I'm going to do breakouts really quickly. And again, just introduce yourselves to your group and share something that's giving you hope. So give me a quick minute to do that, and we'll give you 10 minutes to do that.
Okay. And Sarah was also involved at that time, and we were just trying to figure out what tenant organizing could look like in Connecticut. And that developed into the legislative campaign of 2021, where we fought for tenants' right to counsel. And then coming out of that campaign in the summer of that year was when I was involved in the first real tenant union that got organized at a building here in New Haven, in the city where I live. Over the course of the next several years, we learned a lot, tried a lot of things, some things that worked, some things that didn't, but really became convinced through experience that the best way to build power as tenants is to organize tenant unions where in an apartment building or complex, you're aiming for a majority and ideally a super majority. So over 2/3 of the residents are all in the tenant union together and have a clear communication structure where each resident can get in touch with the leadership of the union, and the leadership of the union can get in touch with all of their members, all of their neighbors, in a really fast manner, faster than the landlord or the property manager. And that has been figuring out how to do that and what that looks like has really been like the core thing that CDTU has been working on for the past few years. We hit a major milestone in 2023, spring of that year and summer, where we took the tenant unions that we had organized at several different apartment complexes in different parts of the state, all came together and decided to sort of formalize the statewide Connecticut Tenants Union. So the structure that we have now is each local tenant union is a chapter of the statewide Connecticut Tenants Union. And then we also have our at-large chapter, which is for tenants who don't yet have a tenant union in their building, but still want to push our work forward and participate. They can be an at-large member. Each chapter has a vice president that represents them on our tenant council, which is our central decision-making body. And then there are 3 of us who are elected by the full membership of the entire Connecticut Tenants Union, the president, myself, the vice president, and our secretary treasurer. So that's our structure. And we do lots of different kinds of things from, again, the bread and butter, like Sarah said, is organizing tenants in apartment buildings and complexes to get a majority into the union and then push the landlord to negotiate for things like limits on rent increases, maintenance, repairs that need to be done, both inside and outside of people's apartments, fair treatment from property managers and staff, and ultimately just a seat at the table and a voice in our own housing conditions, the places that we call home. So we've been able to block a lot of rent increases, prevent a lot of evictions, get a lot of things fixed. Of course, it's been, we've had lots of difficulties that we've had to overcome along the way, but I'm just really, really proud of everyone that I get to organize with on a daily basis. There's just a lot of commitment in our union to the long term, really building an organization that will last, building a movement that will last, and being committed to that, even if some days are really hard. So that's a little bit about Connecticut Tenants Union. I'll pass it back to you, Sarah.
And so I am a lawyer. I'm also in many ways an organizer at heart and have been involved, at times in the past, in particular, also organizing tenants. But my job at the Connecticut Fair Housing Center, we are a nonprofit law firm, mostly lawyers, and, traditionally have done a lot of fair housing discrimination cases, foreclosure defense. But my orientation to being a lawyer is what's sometimes called movement lawyering or community lawyering, where I believe, based on, what I've seen in my experience, is that the only way we're going to change things is through a movement of people who are directly affected, of tenants, of immigrants, of other folks who are building collective power to change things. And lawyers can have a role in those movements, but are not the leaders and are taking direction, from the people that are really building the power that we need to change the laws, to change what our buildings look like, what it means to, be in our homes. So that's sort of the orientation I take to my work with the Connecticut Tenants Union. And, over the last, I think now almost 5 years of working with Luke and the other tenants and tenant organizers in our state, have gotten to support in all sorts of ways. Being a movement lawyer means you're sort of like a Swiss Army knife. You get to do a lot of different things, sometimes random things you wouldn't ever think of, everything from policy to, cases in court to just helping to demystify the law. Because in so many ways, the language of courts, the language of law is intended to keep people out. And one thing I want to do is to make it accessible for people so they can understand their options, strategize about how to organize, and build the tenant unions at the local level and state level that we're going to need to really shift things. So Sid, with that, if you could start our slides, we're just going to go through and talk about, some of the campaigns we've worked on together. And if we can go to the next one. So Luke, do you want to start talking about the recent work we've collaborated on with the Concord Hills Tenant Union?
Yeah, so this was an apartment building in the city of Hartford, Connecticut, which has 120 units. 50 of those units, like a whole wing of the building, was displaced by an electrical fire in August of last year. The fire only affected a handful of units directly, but the damage from the smoke and the sprinkler system, and then some other damage that happened in the building as a result of shady work being done. Ended up just affecting 50 households. So it was over 100 people were displaced and put up in motels by the city of Hartford, originally thinking they would be able to move home in just a few weeks, because at first glance it seemed like the damage to the building was not necessarily that severe. And it seemed, everybody was thinking at the time, this should be 2 to 3 weeks worth of repairs, and then people will be able to go back home. But that ended up turning into a 5-month battle on 2 fronts. We were fighting both the city of Hartford to get people into appropriate temporary housing conditions where they could, cook a meal while they were displaced and be safe and not be breathing moldy air, which is what the situation at the motels where they were originally placed. And then also to get maximum enforcement against the landlord, who was totally dragging their feet on doing these repairs. And so then we were also fighting the landlord to get them to do the repairs. It was an intense fight where we were doing rallies and press conferences and speaking to city council, and at one point even drove 3 hours away to downtown Manhattan to the corporate office of the landlord company, where we picketed them on their home base. We were doing all of those actions at sometimes almost on a weekly basis for several months. So it was an intense fight where people had to, consistently show up and stick together. But it was also a very dedicated group of folks who were fighting for their housing and knew that the thing that stood between them and housing instability and potentially even homelessness was sticking together and fighting it out as a tenant union. And by the end of that fight, I'll tell you the happy ending. We were able to get just about everybody placed either in other apartments on the other side of the building, even at the same rents that they were paying before, even though those were renovated units, or in other buildings owned by the landlord, the same landlord, at rents that they could afford, or in some cases, people got basically temporary rental assistance directly from the landlord so that they could move on and start with a new apartment. So it was a really tough fight, but in the end, we got people in stable housing. Really against it was quite an uphill battle against a lot of odds.
And just like from the legal side, I think is so often the case, as everyone on this call knows, you have laws on the books that simply are not enforced, are blatantly violated, and without a lot of people power, pushing for the city or the state to do something, the rights that we do have are can be really hard to even recognize. And in this case, the city was legally required to put people into safe temporary housing for up to 4 months and was absolutely dragging their feet on it. So a lot of the work I was doing was, helping get the tenant union members up to speed on what their rights were as they directly negotiated with the city. The landlord kept trying to charge people rent on these condemned, units that were completely unlivable, damaged by fire, yet was still threatening people if they didn't pay. So helping push back against the landlord. So, this was a situation where I was able to, help bolster the organizing that the tenants were doing, which is ultimately, what led to this great outcome. And we can go to the next one. I guess I can start, but a lot of what we've been doing together too has been these local legislative campaigns. In Connecticut, we have 169 towns, no county government. Everyone is doing things a little bit differently. And, very few towns and cities are really thinking about the needs of renters, even if renters are the majority of the population and the reason, the elected officials are in office. So a lot of what we've been doing together is working to improve housing code enforcement around conditions. We've done that both in New Haven and Hartford, pushing in Hartford to hire a bunch more housing code inspectors, which a tenant movement actually with many of the tenants that ended up being affected by the Concord Hills fire, went to the first in-person city council meeting they had since the pandemic, totally took it over. we were able to really shift the conversation in Hartford, back to tenants' rights and what people, the conditions people were facing in, and got the city to go from having 5 to 6 housing code inspectors to at one point 17, and setting up a fund to make repairs and bill the landlord when the landlord was dragging their feet on repairs. And, in New Haven, Luke has been working to increase the fines and penalties against landlords. And then in Connecticut, we don't have rent control or rent stabilization, but we have these local boards called fair rent commissions, which can accept complaints from tenants and freeze or lower rent, which can be incredible tools both to get individual relief for people and for organizing. If a bunch of tenants who are unionized, who are working together, file fair rent commission complaints about a big rent increase or unsafe conditions, that can result in a lot of leverage against the landlord to come to the bargaining table and fix things, not just for a few people but for everyone. So we've been trying to improve fair rent commissions to make them as tenant friendly as possible and as useful in organizing, including trying to create collective complaint processes and reviving dormant commissions, and even like helping municipalities create new ones when there was not one. Luke, do you have anything you want to add?
I think that was a great summary. Could probably move on.
Do you want to do the next
Yeah.
one?
So I could talk about our state legislative efforts. So Connecticut is a relatively small state, but of course, still going from the local level to the state level is still a big jump, and it's, takes a lot of coordinating across municipalities. And so that has grown each year. I think we've gotten a little bit sharper at how we run our campaigns and brought new people in, and just each year has been able to build on the next one. So like I mentioned, the first one that I was involved in was 2021, where we fought for funding to provide attorneys to tenants facing eviction. And that was successful. I will say that it was using the ARPA money that we got during COVID. So it was kind of pulling on this temporary pool of money to fund eviction defense attorneys, which has then made a big difference for Connecticut in the state, although it's still not a universal right, which is what we would like it to be. But now we're grappling with how that money needs to be found in the state budget now that the ARPA funds are running out. But that was really kind of the first campaign where a lot of tenants were directly participating and showing up to the public hearing. And it wasn't just attorneys and kind of professional advocates, but it was tenants ourselves showing up. That was the first public hearing that I ever participated in. And then in 2023, we ran a big kind of high profile campaign called Cap the Rent, which we were fighting for a 3% rent cap. The bill that we were backing never made it through the first step in the process. It never got voted out of the housing committee, but it mobilized and activated hundreds of people across the state. We had 2 all-night public hearings that year, where it was just tenant after tenant sharing their stories into the early morning. We were at the Capitol until 6 a.m. For this marathon public hearing. And a lot of people were taking action in other ways, door knocking in their neighborhoods and getting their neighbors involved. So that really helped kind of grow our organization and grow our movement. And it was the way that a lot of tenants in the state found out about tenant organizing and tenant unions for the first time, was through that big campaign, even though our bill didn't actually go anywhere, which personally taught me a lot about how much you can get from a campaign like that. Even if you don't get the win, it can still do a ton to grow the movement and grow the organization. In 2024, we came back to the Capitol again, this time fighting for just cause eviction protection. We were kind of grappling with the fact that the Connecticut legislature, there just were not enough people in office who are going to back something like rent stabilization. But we did think we could potentially get enough support for just cause eviction protection, while still seeing that, it was really motivating to our membership and to tenants that we were talking to show up and support something like that. And part of that is because it would make it safer to organize. If we can pass just cause, it will take away no fault evictions, which are the easiest way the landlords retaliated against us in Connecticut, and I'm sure in many other states right now as well. So last year we ran that campaign, and that time our bill did get out of housing committee, but it didn't get called to the floor for an actual vote. So we still didn't get the win, but we did educate a lot of legislators, educate a lot of ourselves and our membership about Just Cause and why it matters so much. Kind of got the word out in a lot of ways. And this year, we now have about 2 months left in our legislative session in Connecticut. The bill we're fighting for Just Cause again. The bill's been passed out of Housing Committee, and we're working really hard to make sure that we have the votes that we need in both the House and the Senate to get it passed. So we're cautiously optimistic. It's not a sure thing by any means, but we are feeling like we've got a decent shot at passing Just Cause in Connecticut this year, which will mean, so it doesn't apply universally, unfortunately, the bill that we're working on right now. It would apply to tenants who live in buildings of 5 units or more after they've lived there for the first year, unless they're elderly or disabled. The first year thing wouldn't be a requirement. So all tenants after the first year would be covered and protected from no fault eviction. So you could only be evicted for things like non-payment or serious lease violations. You couldn't just be evicted because your lease is up and your landlord doesn't want to renew you and just says you're out of here. They wouldn't be able to do that anymore. There would have to be an actual justification for it. So that's what we're fighting for right now. And again, really want to get it passed because it will then help curb the retaliation that so many of us deal with and see and are aware is a real risk. It certainly won't eliminate retaliation, but it'll take away an important tool that landlords have right now to retaliate against tenants.
And I just wanted to quickly add, and then we can go to questions. I mean, so I've been a lawyer in Connecticut now for about 12 years working on housing issues, and I never saw tenants come to the Capitol or like lead, a legislative campaign for a renters' rights bill until the Right to Counsel for Tenants campaign in 2021, which was so galvanizing for me and really showed that we can actually win big things if we fight together. In the 10 years before that, the legislature really didn't do much of anything for tenants, even though, advocates like myself were asking for things. And I know it can be incredibly intimidating to do a statewide legislative campaign like that and go to the Capitol because the system is designed to keep people out and make people feel, uncomfortable or unsure of themselves, which certainly I did. But we've learned something every year. And even though it doesn't happen as quickly as it should, and it takes a couple of years to win these things, I think this year that we're going to see, the rewards of all of our hard work and see the way that legislative campaigns can really feed into the organizing, which is like how Luke and I first met each other and the first tenant unions in Connecticut formed, which was really out of that Right to Counsel campaign. And here's our contact information. Feel free to email us.
Maybe just one closing comment I want to say is like, when we give a presentation like this, we're like kind of focused on the wins and the successes. Behind the scenes every day, there's so much struggle and hard work and so many people taking on risks to make all this happen. So I don't want it to come across like it's just victory after victory in Connecticut. That's certainly not the case, but I am convinced that tenant unions organizing at the building and apartment level and then connecting with each other across the state to build some serious power at the state level is the thing that's working for us and that's making it possible for us to get some of these things done. So it's an uphill battle, but when neighbors get together and unify and unite and understand their shared self-interests, there's a lot that we can do together.
And I just saw two questions from the chat. So Luke, if you want to answer the one about retaliation, I have something to say about, connecting with lawyers. I think the place to start with is just looking to legal aid and trying to find, maybe one lawyer there to build a relationship with. It can be hard though, because lawyers are not used to taking direction from tenant unions. They're maybe not used to understanding the goals of organizing. Like, I think a lot of lawyers are good at looking at a situation and seeing all the laws that are being violated, all of the possible, you know, like causes of action that can be brought in a lawsuit. But lawsuits drag on for years and years and years. And unless they're like really closely sort of coordinated with like the organizers, can be so demobilizing, because people put a lot of faith in the legal system, which unfortunately like often lets people down or gives them a little bit like not on a timeline that really makes a difference. So finding that one person at a legal aid organization, even a private attorney, that you're going to be building a longer term relationship with, and maybe bringing into the organizing in some way and having them come to a meeting and kind of see what it looks like and helping them understand, I think is the best way to connect with a lawyer to support this kind of work. And then Luke, do you want to share about retaliation and inoculation? And
Yeah, I mean, fear of retaliation is comes up all the time in our work. We just had a training on Saturday, and that's often the part. Our trainings focus on like how to have a conversation with a neighbor about joining a tenant union. Basically, that's the whole training. Like, how do you actually have that conversation effectively, and how to talk to neighbors about retaliation and understanding the risks of taking action and of not taking action, because tenants are getting evicted every day, whether or not they're outspoken and organizing and taking action. Evictions are happening. So anyways, that part of the conversation about like how to move people from fear to anger at the injustice that they would be put in a position where they would be made to feel so afraid simply for exercising their basic rights, and to then move that anger into a place of hope. Because if enough of us are angry enough to get out there and take action, the power's on our side. There's more of us than there are of them. And that's kind of the core thing that we all have to sort of remind each other of, and reground each other in that core truth. But yeah, no, retaliation's real. I mean, we've had so many leaders get threatened with it, get hit with it, go to eviction court. We've fought back a lot of evictions. We've gotten landlords to rescind evictions using both legal strategies and non-legal strategies. We've held protests over retaliatory evictions. And, you know, that has been a key part of our defense mechanism too, not only relying on our legal aid allies, but fighting back in the streets, and just having neighbors stand up for each other and say, we're not going to stand for this. And that has actually worked. So yeah, I imagine most people on this call understand, like, this stuff is happening to us either way. The evictions and the loss of our housing and the rent increases and the poor housing conditions is happening every day. The question is, can we make a collective choice together to stand up and speak out? And the more of us who do that, the safer we all are.
Thank you, Sarah and Luke, and thank you for sharing those thoughts too in your last answer, Luke. I think a lot of us need to hear that right now. And for the honesty and rawness that comes with this type of work, because it's a lot of like slow progression until you get a big win. So thank you again for sharing. And I think there was one question we had in the chat that I think Luke also answered in the chat for the folks that are watching this back. I think there was someone who was asking if the apartments were owned by a corporation or if they were privately owned. And they were a big corporation that y'all were working against called Gray Hill Group, I think you said.
Yeah, that was the owners of the Concord Hills building that we were talking about, where the tenants were displaced by a fire. I will say that strategically speaking, we do try to pick our targets carefully. We don't necessarily go after any and everyone, like any old landlord, just because they're doing bad things. We try to pick targets that are both, that we think that if we organize enough of their tenants, we really can win and like truly bring them to the negotiating table. So we're not going after the biggest landlords in the state right away. We're kind of building towards that incrementally. But we're also not typically going after like an individual landlord who owns a handful of units, because that's almost like too small for the win to really mean that much to too many people. So we try to think about it really strategically, and so then end up going after a lot of kind of medium-sized like landlord companies that are not based in California, on the other side of the country. They're in our own region. We can like track them down, but who own a lot of units and have a lot of tenants who want to join the union. So it's not always quite so neat as that. Like the Gray Hill fight kind of landed in our laps because of this fire that happened with the building we already had organized. But in general, we try to think carefully about which landlords we're targeting.
I just wanted to say too, there's at least 2 tenant union CT2 chapters that are public housing authority residents in state subsidized elderly and disabled complexes, where one of them, which was the first tenant union I organized with, was able to get rid of abusive management twice. And the other one, which is more recent, has like really incredibly been able to elect multiple tenants and allies to the board that runs the housing authority, which is really exciting.
That's awesome. Thank you. Luke, did you want to add something to that? I want to make sure I didn't cut you off.
Yeah, just we have those 2 housing authority complexes, and then we've got like another senior housing HUD complex, and then another low-income housing tax credit affordable housing complex. And then the majority of the rest of our chapters are, private sort of market rate rentals, where you might have some residents who have Section 8 vouchers or something, but are just like privately owned. So we've got kind of a wide range of different types of housing that we're organizing in.
Awesome. Thank you. Annette, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Good evening again. This is also informative. Again, I thank you all for sharing the information. When it comes to HUD and which we know as NYCHA, as far as like the NYCHA development, housing developments, how difficult and why is it so hard to actually have a lawsuit against them when they actually disinvest in certain properties?
I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, it shouldn't be hard for one, I want to say, because I know that this is happening all over. The disinvestment by public housing authorities, the disinvestment by private, section like project-based Section 8 complexes. I think from a legal standpoint, it can, like, those are big cases. And with so much disinvestment in legal aid as well, there's fewer lawyers sort of with enough time to do the like months and months of investigation. It would be able to take on something like that and to sue, HUD or the housing authority or, the private complex, because so much energy is just, being put into trying to keep people in their homes. So I think those are kind of some of the systemic reasons. And, as I've found just over the years of being a lawyer, there's so many like little barriers that are put up all along the way that make it so hard to get people justice within the legal system. And it does sometimes happen. I mean, there's a complex in Connecticut that I was working with for a little while where people, project-based Section 8, really bad mold. People were finally able to get repairs and get some money for their, health situations that they went through. But I know for everyone like that there are 10, 15, 20 more where they weren't able to get it. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but I think that there's just all these barriers on multiple levels.
I think that's unfortunate because I'm from New York, so again, we have public housing. We're asking them to save public housing, of course, because that's basically the most, you can't get too much better than that. And because of the homeless crisis as well, to dislocate people and then not have a place for them to actually be housed correctly, this is getting outrageous. Okay, so when it comes to even monitoring the monies that have been allocated the right way, and there's no real supervision, that was another issue. Okay, so there might not be any quick fixes, but it definitely needs to be addressed. So thank you.
100%. Thank you so much, Annette. And we are pretty much at the hour now. There were some questions in the chat too that weren't necessarily connected to the topic at hand, but I did put emails in the chat so we can follow up afterwards. But thank you again, everybody, for sharing your thoughts and sharing your questions, and a huge thank you to both Luke and Sarah for joining us today for this conversation. And as always, if y'all have any feedback, or if you want to see any particular theme or discussion in a future Tenant Talk Live, you're always welcome to email me with those questions or concerns. And we'll make sure to include both Sarah and Luke's contact information in the follow-up email so you have that. But yeah, just a reminder for folks really quickly, our next Tenant Talk Live will be on May 5th at 6 p.m. Eastern time, like always, and then we'll put the link to register in the chat if you don't have that already. And as a reminder, we're always looking for blog post authors for our On the Homefront blog. So if you have an advocacy story you want to share, or want to talk about like your lived expertise, we'll have you can email our outreach inbox in order for them to share like the guidelines for that. And we
I
do
got a
provide
good
a
one,
stipend for
Sid.
them.
How they're using my
Yes.
pension to buy the apartments that they're trying to put me out of. They're using my pension money.
No. No,
we
yes,
gotta,
definitely.
we gotta get the unions to the table, and they better get some housing committees where they're putting our pension money.
Exactly, yes. So anything like that that you're willing to that you want to share with the world, feel free to email the outreach inbox and we can work with you on that. But yeah, thank you again for sharing, Talisa. And then the last reminder is just to join our Facebook group if you haven't. Folks can connect there outside of this group. But yeah, thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. We'll see you in May. Have a good night, everybody.
You guys were great. Enjoy. Be safe.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.